Welcome back to House of L, my friends. I hope you're having a fantastic day. So before we dive into the charts and headlines today, let's just talk about the feeling in the air right now. It's one of those moments where the data tells you everything that's going up, but somehow it doesn't really feel like it. GDP is ticking higher, AI is pushing online spending to record levels, and stock tickers are mostly green, but talk to the people on the ground, and what you actually hear is, yeah, but my job doesn't really feel any safer. Everything's expensive. Nobody knows what next year is really going to look like. When I saw these numbers, especially the record Black Friday sales and the bump in GDP figures, it honestly didn't seem real at first. How do we have record online shopping and yet headlines warning about tariffs, higher inflation, and weak job growth? How does that work? Are we getting richer or are we just spending more to stand still? That's the emotional knot at the center of this video, because beneath the surface of growth, you've got trade wars, AI disruption, and a real question about who's actually winning from all of this churn. Let's look at what came up first. Real GDP in Canada increased 0.6% in Q3 2025 after falling 0.5% in Q2. Okay, that's the biggest decline in imports since 2022. But exports are edging up. This headline is from Canada's National Statistics Agency, and it was released just a couple of days ago. Now, on the surface, it's good news, right? A bounce back in GDP after a contraction. But immediately there is a twist that the reason for the rebound is not booming demand, but a collapse in imports. In other news, we grew because we bought less from abroad, not because people suddenly felt flush. Now, on paper, this sounds like good news, right? Exports are up, imports are down. And if you just look at the headline, Canada's economy grew. But let's dig into how this actually works behind the scenes and why it might not feel like a win for everyone. First, just a little bit of economic context. When we talk about GDP, we're really just measuring all the stuff that a country produces, plus what it exports, minus what it imports, and including how much the government and households are actually spending. If a country exports more than it imports, that boosts GDP. If households and the governments are spending big, that helps as well. But the twist is that this quarter's growth is not the kind that you would celebrate at a family dinner. Most of it is happening because Canadians, for a variety of reasons, bought fewer goods from abroad, especially from the US, and not because everyone just suddenly started making more money or spending more money. Think about it like this. Imagine you're running a household budget, your own household budget at home. If you decide to buy less from outside, maybe you're skipping your usual cross-border shopping trips, or you're just boycotting certain American brands because of tariffs or politics, your own bank account might look healthier for a moment, for a couple of months as well. But are you actually richer? Are you actually better off? Not necessarily. You might just be making do with less or substituting out of necessity, not out of actual real abundance. Now, add in the fact that both household and government spending are falling. That essentially means that regular people are tightening their belts. Maybe not buying that new car, holding off on big purchases, or just feeling anxious about the future. And at the same time, governments are pulling back too, whether that's fewer infrastructure projects or less money for services. So yes, exports are growing, and that's generally positive, especially if Canada is finding new buyers beyond the US, as it has been. Mark Carney has been signing deals left and right. That's diversification, my friends, and it makes the economy less fragile in the long run. But the fact that imports are dropping isn't just about buying local or a patriotic shift. A big piece of that drop is likely driven by tariffs making US goods more expensive, and by a conscious choice, maybe even an informal boycott, hint hint, among Canadians to avoid US products in response. On a macro level, when Canadians pull back from US goods, whether out of necessity or protest, GDP can tick up mathematically because the minus imports part of the equation shrinks. But for people on the ground, it can actually mean higher prices, fewer choices, and less satisfaction overall. The deeper issue is essentially this, that GDP can grow even when people are not spending and governments are cutting back. It's technically a statistical quirk that doesn't always reflect prosperity in a country. If growth is mostly about buying less, it can be a sign that the economy is actually under strain, not necessarily thriving. People might be acting out of caution or hardship, not necessarily confidence. And that's why economists and anyone thinking critically shouldn't just cheer a positive number. We need to actually ask what is underneath all of this. Is this the kind of growth that feels good and creates opportunity? Or is it just the result of people hunkering down and making do with less? If you're watching this, I'd love to know, do you actually feel like these numbers really match your own experiences? Are you spending less, switching brands, or feeling pressure to boycott? Let us know in the comments. I really want to hear how this is playing out in actual real life. But let's look a little bit deeper into what it's actually like on the ground. Here's the wage map. Compensation is up on average, but it is lumpy. Canada is plus 1.1% quarter-to-quarter wage growth, with biggest jumps in Northern Territories, Quebec, and the Maritimes. The North sees the biggest percentage gains, but remember, that is from a smaller base. Out west, British Columbia barely budges at plus 0.2%, and this raises questions, right? Who's actually getting ahead in this economy? In places like the North, even a small dollar increase can look big in percentage terms because average wages are lower to begin with. So a new mining project, a government contract, or just seasonal hiring can suddenly lift the whole region's numbers. So just be cautious. There is a good story here, my friends, but we just have to be cautious about what the trade-offs are to the analysis. In Quebec and the Maritimes, you might be seeing the ripple effects of targeted investments or a rebound in sectors like tourism and energy. And meanwhile, out west, especially in British Columbia, sluggish wage growth could reflect a mix of high living costs, a slowdown in sectors like real estate, and fewer new jobs being created. Sometimes it's just about the industries that dominate each region: energy, public sector, tech. And sometimes it's about where the government is putting its money or where private investment is actually lending. All of this essentially means that while the national average looks decent, the real experience depends a lot on where you live and what kind of work you do. Now, rebound from a contraction of 1.8% in Q2 as US tariffs hit, we have mixed details here with import pullback driving gain. It's important to corroborate analysis from multiple sources though, which is why I dig deeper like this. This snippet explains the so-called rebound. Basically, Canada's economy shrank in Q2, hit by US tariffs, and now recovers mostly by importing less. Exports are barely up, household spending is actually falling, less spending on cars, less inventory buildup. BMO economist actually puts it quite bluntly. Pleasant surprise, but under the hood, it's not necessarily the strongest of all recoveries that are possible. If we're thinking structurally, this is a country squeezed between weak demand and external shocks. It's essentially growth by subtraction. Let's look at what the companies are doing. Corporate income is up 2.5% in Q3, which has been driven by energy and mining. Financial sectors are up as well. This is where the money is flowing in essence, into corporate profits, especially energy and mining. Rising prices for oil, gas, and metals, helped along by global turbulence, are pumping up the income statements for Canada's big players. Even the banks are cashing in, but again, for most people on the ground, the link between rising corporate profits and real wages is a little bit thin, right? What's implied but not said is that prosperity isn't necessarily trickling down. Just a very quick personal note before we dive back in. My new book, Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies, is finally out in the world. This isn't just a guide to thinking more clearly. It's really about finding a sense of clarity and calm in a world that just keeps getting louder and louder. If you ever feel like I do, a bit worn down by all of the noise and knee-jerk opinions, and you want practical ways to think things through properly, especially under pressure, I think you'll really find it valuable. And if you prefer to listen instead of read, I've now added a 24-minute companion podcast that walks you through some of the key ideas in depth. You'll find all of the links down below, along with a launch video that explores the bigger themes. There's a special discount for subscribers as well, so if you're curious, just hit that subscribe button and check it out when you have a moment. And one more extra tiny thing. Maybe you didn't know, but I'm a computer scientist and I have a PhD in the field. I'm working on a new course all about AI fluency, essentially making sense of the technology that's shaping the next decade. If you're interested in this space and want to help guide what I build, I'd love to have your input. There is a very quick 8-question survey, just a couple of minutes to fill out, and your thoughts will directly influence the content that I build next. The links to everything are below. It would mean so much to hear from you. Thank you for listening, but now let's dive back into it. We talked a lot about Canada, but now let's flip to the US. The story is almost a mirror image. Faster GDP growth predicted, but job growth is weak and inflation is super stubborn over there. Economists are more optimistic about headline growth, 1.8 GDP rise forecast for 2025. That's nice, but every paragraph is basically a tug of war here. Tariffs and inflation are still dragging everything down. And to think clearly here, you really have to hold two truths at once. Economies can grow on the aggregate, while most people feel squeezed, unstable, or left behind. So what we've got here is a kind of economic what-if exercise. Big banks like JP Morgan run these scenario analysis to help clients and policymakers imagine what could happen if a handful of risky ingredients all hit the pot at once. In this case, the scenario they're sketching out is one where US tariffs shoot up to 20%. I mean, it's not that far-fetched, right? Net migration falls to basically zero for several years, also not that far-fetched given the current president. And the Federal Reserve, that is the US central bank, makes a mistake with interest rates. That is less likely in my opinion, but still, let's go with it. What does that actually mean on the ground? First, it means higher tariffs. That's the government making imported goods, things like electronics, pharmaceuticals, cars, more expensive, either to protect local industries or retaliate against other countries, or just a certain president having a bad day. The logic usually is let's help American business, but the side effect is that everyone pays more for the same stuff, and those costs ripple out through the whole economy. Second, net migration falling to zero. This is not just fewer people moving to US, it's also fewer workers, fewer students, fewer entrepreneurs, and long-term, less growth. Fewer people means less demand for everything. Fewer people to buy houses, they need less food, they need less services. It slows the engine of the economy, especially in a country that's always relied on newcomers for energy and innovation. And now for the big twist, how does the Federal Reserve respond? Here the scenario assumes that the Fed cuts interest rates, maybe hoping to soften the blow from higher tariffs and a cooling job market. But if inflation starts running hot because of those tariffs, everything getting pricier, cutting rates could just add fuel to the fire. That is a very unenviable situation for the Fed. And when inflation takes off, the Fed has to slam on the brakes later by hiking rates hard, which risks choking off growth altogether. That's the policy whiplash, swinging from one extreme to the other, hoping to correct mistakes, but often making the ride bumpier for everyone. What's implied here, but not always said actually out loud, is that government and central bank interventions can have unexpected side effects if they don't do enough analysis, right? We like to think somebody is steering the ship, and they are, but sometimes every turn just creates another wave. And for ordinary people, this means that the future gets harder to predict, prices are unstable, job markets whiplash back and forth, and the economy can feel more volatile and not less. So when you see a scenario like this from JP Morgan, it's less about predicting exactly what will happen and more about stress testing the system. Basically, if we do X, what are all the ways that this could go sideways? It's a reminder that especially in a globalized world like ours, you can't just pull one lever without watching all of the others shake. This chart is essentially the potential future sketched in 3 scenarios. You don't see headlines like this by accident. The gap between more people, fewer tariffs, and more tariffs, fewer people is almost $1 trillion by 2030. This is a reminder that demographics and trade policy are not just politics, they are hard economics. Shut the doors, build the walls, slap on tariffs, and growth will just be lower. By the way, if you like this kind of breakdown, pulling apart the headlines, looking for the signals behind the noise, feel free to subscribe. We're trying to aim for 50,000 by Christmas. It really helps more people see nuanced critical analysis like this, and hopefully you enjoy it as well. But this here, now this feels like the ultimate contradiction in my view. AI helps drive record 11.8 billion in Black Friday online sales, up 9.1% from last year. Now, on one hand, we have tight budgets, unemployment near 4th-year high, consumer confidence at a 7-month low, and on the other, record-breaking spending. What is going on? AI tools are helping people find deals faster, sure, but the summary knows that foot traffic in stores is weak, online is surging, brick and mortar is struggling. This is an economy that's shifting under our feet, more digital, more algorithmic, and for physical retailers, far more precarious. Let's have a very quick read. We're seeing holiday shopping amid tighter budgets, higher unemployment, 10.4% growth in e-com versus 1.7% in store, AI-driven site traffic up 805%. This is crazy. Let's just pause for a second. 805% more AI-driven traffic. It's almost science fiction, right? But what is implied is that yes, people are still spending, but they're hunting for bargains with a level of urgency and technical sophistication that speaks to stress as much as abundance. Every dollar counts more. Every purchase is algorithmically optimized. This reminds me of what we saw in the early pandemic, right? A digital surge, but not the kind of growth that feels good in your bones, you know? And then here's the market painting a mostly positive picture. Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, banks, all up. Nvidia surprisingly is down, but maybe that AI bubble is a real thing. Along with big pharma names like Eli Lilly, the winners right now are the platforms and the extractors, the companies that run the infrastructure, the logistics, or the energy flows. But if we look with clear eyes, markets can be up while economies are struggling and inequality is deepening, right? That's the paradox at the core of this whole news cycle. So what is unsaid but clearly shaping this moment? Well, first, this is an economy where volatility is the new normal. Policy, technology, and geopolitics are creating sharper booms and busts. GDP rebounds, then contracts, then rebounds again, but never really feels very stable. Second, the growth we're being sold is often just the math of higher prices, more debt, or AI making commerce more frictionless, not necessarily more meaningful or shared prosperity. Third, for ordinary people, the lesson is essentially that adaptation is everything. Whether it's learning to use AI, definitely check out that quiz that I have in the links below, to hunt deals, or navigating an unstable job market, survival means essentially staying nimble. And critically, if we're thinking very clearly, we have to ask who benefits from this narrative of rebound and resilience. Is it policymakers, corporation, ordinary households? Because for many, record spending or profits don't really translate to a sense of security, you know? And at the end of the day, the dominant emotion here is contradiction, a sense of recovery, but also anxiety, growth, but only for some, record highs, but record stress. The core insight for me is this: when the headlines don't match your lived experiences, trust your gut, but also seek the structure beneath the surface. Numbers don't lie, but they can distract. The real story is always about who gets to define growth and who is left out of the boom. So I'll leave you with this question. How do you think this plays out? Is this a new cycle of genuine growth or just another round of creative math and digital hustle? Let me know in the comments below. We always have such a healthy debate in this community. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, if you want to understand how to navigate the noise, the hype, and the complexity of our current moment, I think you'd really enjoy my book. It's called Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies, and it's written for people who want to stay grounded, think clearly, and live in reality, even when the world makes that feel impossible. I've also now included a 24-minute podcast episode where we unpack some of the ideas behind Awake in a more relaxed, conversational way, perfect if you prefer to listen while walking, driving, or just taking a break from screens. You'll find the links to everything down below. I'd love to know what you think of it. As always, thank you for being here and for thinking through these questions with me. If you like the conversation, please do consider subscribing for more. And don't forget to check out these other videos that I've linked here as a natural next step for a deeper dive. As always, when the world feels chaotic, don't just read the news. Learn to read between the lines and join House of Al.